Hi, this is your sewing Sherpa Shauna here for Sew Lunchables, and I hope you guys had a safe and fun Memorial Day weekend. We didn't actually, was it Memorial? Yeah, it was Memorial. I get that and Liberty mixed up. We didn't actually film anything on Memorial Day, although we had a full house here like all day. I just didn't have anybody who could film. So today we were going to do the bias binding foot, but to save my life, I cannot find a single bias binding foot in town or in the studio. So we're going to be doing a quick change to the embroidery foot, which is a really fun foot. So I'm going to show you, here is a regular foot, and here is an embroidery foot. They look an awful lot alike from the top, especially this brand. This has the clear window. It's got the two legs here. It's got the two legs here. This maybe are a little bit wider. The trick is when you flip them over, the embroidery foot has got this trough that's dug out so that it allows an embroidery stitch that has some height to it to pass through, while this one holds the fabric nice and flat against the feed dogs. So a lot of times I'll find people, they'll have their embroidery foot on their sewing machine and they'll think that they have a good foot to sew with. And while you can sew with this foot, it doesn't hold the fabric nice and flat against the sewing machine. So there are a few different versions of the embroidery foot. This one's called an open toe embroidery foot, and it doesn't have anything in the middle of that, so that something with some height can already come through before it hits that trough. And then you've got this other clear embroidery foot. It's a little bit wide over here. This is kind of the cheaper model of it. So to show you what embroidery is, at first I'm going to do a little sampler here. So I'm going to have my regular foot on to do the regular sewing. And oh, I don't have my nipper, so I'm going to use my giant Kais to cut the thread here. And there we go. So I have got a regular foot on, press your foot on, and I'm not really familiar with this machine. So there we go. And I have two layers of fabric here, and I'm just going to draw a design. Heart's easy, although it's actually not easy, because anytime you're doing curves, you know, it takes a minute to get around them. And also that point at the end. Oh my gosh, that's the weirdest heart ever. That looks like mine. So to start with, I've got these two layers of fabric, and you can, you know, pin the two together to keep them from shifting. I'm not a huge fan of pinning, so I'm going to skip that step. And I'm going to be in a straight stitch. That's two, with my needle centered and normal tension. And then the stitch length, it doesn't really matter. The shorter the stitch is, the more control you have, the longer the stitch is, the quicker you're going to get done. So I'm going to have it like at 3, which is kind of long. I don't need to back stitch, because all I'm doing here is getting the two layers to stick together. I'm going to pick a line, any line. Theoretically, the I want to be back in that other spot. Theoretically, the chalk will come out when I wash it. 9 out of 10 it does. It's just that one time where you're like, darn it, why? Okay, so I've sewn around on my line. And again, like I said, I don't need to back tack this. And then I'm going to trim up to my line with my Kais, and kind of be careful when you trim up to your line, because it's really easy to cut the second layer. Sometimes I'll work at it from a different angle, but I'm just cutting really close to my stitch line. And I felt me kind of trying to cut through that layer, so I'm going to skip it and go in a different direction. And this is just one type of embroidery. Of course, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. So right here, if you notice, I'm kind of trying to cut up to it, and you'll see that I've got the blade width between me and that cut line. So I really actually want to be going at it from this side so that I can get really close to that sew line, because then the bottom blade's on the outside instead of the inside. And that'll make it so you can get super, super close to your previous stitch line. And, oh, this one's being a little bit of a challenge on this corner. All right, boring part's over. And now I'm going to do my embroidery. So I pop off this foot and I can choose any one of these that I want, but I feel like this one, the nice wide flat one with the open but solid center, is my favorite. Drop on that one. Got a question? No? Okay. All right. So then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put my sewing machine into a zigzag stitch. So I choose stitch number 3 on this machine, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to turn the length down super, super short. I'm going to do like F, which is, I don't know what F stands for, fun. I'm on the fun stitch here. And then I'm going to turn the stitch width up to pretty high. In fact, I'm going to start with the highest stitch width. And I'm just going to test it on a couple layers of fabric here to see if that's actually the stitch I'm after. So, no, that's too wide. That's too wide. I'm going to go down to maybe 5. Yeah, I like that. Oftentimes with embroidery, I will also drop the tension so that the tension on the top is a little bit looser, and so that the back side wins the tug of war, so that the top side looks super smooth. So I'm going to drop the tension down to just a little bit under 3. And I like that short stitch. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to send my cut line right down the middle of the embroidery foot. And again, I don't have to back tack. And if you feel like you're going nowhere, you're going nowhere. You might want to lengthen the stitch just a little bit. So again, you can see I'm not pushing, I'm not pulling. My whole job here is just to guide. You might feel like you need to push it or pull it because it's going so slow, but that's just the factor of how the embroidery stitch looks or functions. I'm spinning it like a record here at the top. And my goal is to have the right needle stroke off the edge of the fabric and the left needle stroke over it. So I'm covering up that edge. And you see now why you don't need a back tack, because you're basically back tacking over that whole darn thing. Now, and it does make a difference when you pivot which direction the needle is in. So I pivoted, and if I go and start my next stitch, I'm going to be in my fabric. So I'm going to lift the needle up. Again, always turn your handle towards you. I'm going to scoot this over, and I'm going to go back down to the back side of my previous stitch. And you're welcome to get in closer if you want. We have a few people here in the studio who are watching. Jake has a really good spot right behind the operator. Okay. So now you can see kind of what the embroidery stitch will do, and you'll see that it's got quite a bit of height to it, like it's puffy, it sticks up, and that's why you need to have that trough so that you don't hit it with your presser foot. How many minutes do we have left?
7.
7?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so do either of you want to finish this up, or you want to finish up? I'm gonna go grab some stuffing really quick.
No, I don't.
Okay, I have a question. Okay, all right, I'm gonna go grab some stuffing. Yeah. And then I'll ask you. All right, what's your question, Victoria?
I was curious if, if it's embroidery, is there any special different thread you'd recommend?
Or is that just good question? That's an excellent question. So embroidery thread, there is a ton of it out there, and it's so pretty. It's like they got sparkly stuff, smooth stuff, variegated colored stuff. Yeah,
Sewing machine, not
yeah,
hand embroidery.
yeah, the sewing machine, exactly. So if you go over,
Oh,
yeah, right, if you go over to where they sell the thread at Joann's, you'll see that there's sections that will have the, Silky is a big brand. I think Metric Scheme is another big brand. But they have some really fun stuff, and oftentimes I'll have people come in to sew their regular stuff with like embroidery floss because it's so cute. But embroidery thread does not work very well. See, that kind of got stuck over that. It was double height, trying to do a little bit of a tug. And here I am at the end, which is also the beginning. And I'm gonna, if I were doing this for reals, I would leave myself a nice long tail. I would thread these up with a regular sewing needle and pull them through the back side so that you don't have any like threads hanging or sticking up, but because this is just like a really fun sampling. So one thing I wanted to show you, so you get done, we have a little sample of this out there. One thing you can do that's kind of fun is make your embroidery a little bit more three-dimensional. This is tricky, you gotta cut a hole in your fabric, so you gotta believe. Doesn't need to be a very big hole, but then you can take some batting. And you can stuff it in that hole. And I'm gonna make the hole kind of bigger because I can just hand sew it closed if I wanted to or whatever, but just so you can see, stuff it in there. And then you've got like a three-dimensional embroidery patch. And if you go to shaunasmith.us, you'll see when I did a skull pillow like that. It was a really fun one. So yeah, and then you would attach this back down to some other, whatever you wanted it to be hooked to give that puffed up look. So
Shauna,
yes,
can I ask a question?
of course.
That was very nice what you did, but the advertising for this was to show different different feet for sewing machines. And it didn't say anything about embroidery, and I don't have an embroidery machine. So you did a nice job, but I thought I was going to be learning about different feet.
Who am I speaking with?
Eileen.
Eileen, hi Eileen. This is not an embroidery machine. This is a regular sewing machine. It's just a regular machine that you use. And this is one I would use to make my apron with or whatever project. It just has, I guess you have you taken the stitch by stitch class yet?
No, I just have a regular sewing machine, and I can put different feet on it, but that's what I thought this was going to be. That it said to show you different.
Right. Yes. Each week we do
feet.
Yeah. Each week we do one different foot, and this week I was supposed to do the bias foot.
I didn't know that it was each week is a different foot. I thought it was going to be showing you several today.
No, we just do one every Monday.
I apologize. It didn't say that on here.
Oh, well, I will make sure and clarify that.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay.
What's this button for?
Button on the side of this?
Yes.
Good question. I think it latches onto something, but I'm not sure what. Yeah, I have to find that out, Joe. I have no idea, but a lot of these feet have this little button on it. I've never used the button for anything, but I'll do some research into that. We'll wrap back around to the regular straight stitch foot and figure out what the little bouncy button on the side is for.
Sorry.
So Eileen, yeah, I will double check my description, but yeah, we're just doing one a week. This week was supposed to be the bias binder foot, but I couldn't find any of them. I went to the store, they didn't have any. I was like, well, show me.
I think I can help with that because in our class last week, you were speaking about the binder foot, and I ordered one on Amazon and brought it in. So if you want to take a look to see if it works with your brothers.
Yeah, it will. It'll work here. Yeah, and I can order one up. I just didn't have one for right now. So any other questions?
Right. Yes. I have a second one. Do you, when you advertise this, can you put what kind of presser foot that you're going to show? Because I stayed home for this. I want to get an overview of what you were going to show. And because I didn't know that it was going to be one presser foot a week, I stayed home for this, and this really doesn't do me any good because I don't have an embroidery choice on my machine. So,
Do you have a zigzag stitch on your machine?
yes.
Then that's exactly what I'm using. I'm using the zigzag stitch. That's
Mhm.
it. That is the embroidery stitch on this machine. Zigzag.
Mhm.
Although there are a lot of other little stitches down here that also would require the embroidery foot, like this one here, these little stitches here, 13, 14, 15, and 16 also are very tight. 8 is very tight. So they all could deal with the embroidery foot. It should tell you in your owner's manual which foot to use when you are. selecting.
Okay. All right. But is it possible for you to put in what presser foot you're going to show?
Yes, yes, and this week I did put in the description that I was gonna do the bias binding foot, but again, I lost it, so I can't find it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
All
I
right.
apologize.
Thank you.
Yeah, and next week we'll do the bias binding foot, so just FYI, that's what's gonna
Okay.
be.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I see what your bias binding foot looks like?
Yeah, I have it in my cell. I'll get it.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be
Do you